And then fast forwarding things one more time, check this out what we've accomplished. We have a copy here of Windows Server Core that's now ready to be used. Over here, let's then change the administrator password and punch in the new credentials here that we can use, and then log on with this password here to now actually be able to make use and modify our copy of Windows Server, this Server Core instance that we should assume also has Hyper-V then installed. Let me just make the screen just a little bit bigger here for you by adjusting the font size here and the actual font itself, so that we can then take a look at some of the further commands that will be necessary to then attach to the other resources that make up this network. I have a couple of commands in here, again, that you have seen already that we will use for further configuring this copy of Windows. Let's launch PowerShell here. And then from within the PowerShell command prompt, let us then enter in a new net IP address, interface alias, then Ethernet 0, the same Ethernet 0 we were working with before. The IP address is 192.168. Let's call this 3.200, with the prefix length being 24 and the default gateway being 192.168.3.2. So that sets the IP address appropriately. Let us also then set the DNS server address. So set DNS client server address here, client server address, as interface alias, then Ethernet 0, and then server address being 192.168.3.10, which is our domain controller here for the environment. Let us also set a new net firewall rule, because I'm going to cheat here. This new net firewall rule will be the same rule we did before, which essentially creates a full and open firewall to make things easier as we're going through the further discussions or demonstrations here. So let's do allow all traffic as this rule here, with the direction being outbound and then the action being allow. And let's repeat the rule over there for the inbound traffic as well. Again, don't do this in production, but it makes things easier here for the lab and the other demonstrations we're working with. Lastly, let's actually rename this computer, because the machine name right now is the random machine name, like what you get after you complete any initial installation of Windows. Let us now rename this computer and add it into the domain as a machine called, let's call it Hyper-V1. So add computer, then new name Hyper-V1. The domain name being, or not domain credential, domain name being company.pri, and then restart the computer. If I've done everything correctly here, and that includes punching in my password, when this machine reboots, it should reboot back into the domain, and I should be able to access it from my Windows 10 machine as a Hyper-V host. So let me fast forward one more time to the other end of the reboot. You can see here that we're now applying those computer settings here onto this machine. And after we complete this reboot, I should be able to then switch back to my desktop, right back over here. This is again my desktop, and be able to then access this host as a Hyper-V host. Let's see how successful we are. Here is Hyper-V Manager, which before we were using just on my desktop to run this initial nano server that we built before. If I've done everything correctly, I should be able to attach to this Hyper-V1 machine here. And indeed, yep, I can now use this as a Hyper-V host that exists in my domain. So hopefully this should be just a little exciting for you in terms of the kinds of automations that you really can bring to bear when it comes time to install copies of Windows Server 2016 into your environment. And again, everything we're talking about here is just the foundations for all of those other, sometimes more graphically oriented tools like Windows Deployment Services or Configuration Manager. Because you understand how things work here at the foundation, those tools will make a lot more sense when you begin that exploration.